You're standing in a cave. It's 30,000 BC. A baby has just been born. There's no hospital, no incubator, no government program, no pediatrician, no pamphlet on healthy infant development, no hotline to call, no form to fill out, no social worker who shows up 3 days later to check on things. There's just you, the firelight, the cold, and a newborn that, by the standards of your tribe, doesn't look quite right. Maybe it's too small. Maybe one of its limbs is bent the wrong way. Maybe it's not crying the way the others cried. Maybe it just came out looking like something your tribe elder doesn't trust. And in that moment, no one was asking about feelings. No one was asking what the mother wanted. No one was asking what the baby deserved. The only question on the table was the one it had always been. Can this group survive? This is the story of what ancient humans actually did when a baby wasn't born the way they wanted. And I need to be upfront with you. This story is uncomfortable. It should be. Because the answer isn't what most people expect, and the evidence behind it forces you to sit with something difficult. The idea that the humans who built the foundations of civilization, who painted the walls of caves, who buried their dead with flowers, were also capable of a coldness that modern society has spent centuries trying to forget. Because here's the thing nobody tells you. This wasn't a rare decision. It wasn't a crisis. In many ancient societies, it was a system. A cold, calculated, survival-driven system that lasted for tens of thousands of years. And the evidence for this is genuinely unsettling. The selection problem. For most of human prehistory, keeping every baby that was born wasn't the default. It was a choice. Hunter-gatherer bands were small, 20, 40, maybe 60 people at most. They moved constantly. They had no surplus food, no way to store calories for a hard winter, no way to call for help if a drought hit or if a harsh season wiped out 3 months of resources in a week. Every new mouth was a calculation. A band of 40 people could sustain a certain number of dependents, elderly members, young children, pregnant women. Each of them required resources without immediately contributing to the group's survival. And in a world without margins, adding one more dependent, especially one who might never contribute, could tip the balance from survival to collapse. Archaeologists have a term for what happened when that calculation came out negative: infant exposure. The practice of leaving a newborn somewhere, a hillside, a forest, a riverbank, and not going back. And before you dismiss this as the behavior of monsters, think about that for a second. These weren't people who hated their children. These were people who had already lost siblings, parents, and children to starvation and cold. They knew, in a way no modern person can fully imagine, what it meant to watch a group collapse because its resources ran out. They weren't making this decision easily. They were making it because the alternative to abandoning one baby was watching the whole group starve. That's not cruelty, that's math. Brutal, heartbreaking, ancient math. And it wasn't just about food, it was about mobility. A hunter-gatherer band that can't move quickly is a dead hunter-gatherer band. A newborn that requires constant carrying, constant feeding, constant attention slows the group down. And in a world where your survival depends on covering miles a day, that slowdown can be fatal. The evidence shows up everywhere. In bones. In laws that treat newborns as not quite persons until a specific moment after birth. The question was never if this happened. The question is how, why, and what it tells us about who we were. The archaeology, what the bones actually say. The physical record of infant death in the ancient world is abundant, but figuring out which deaths were natural, accidental, or deliberate is genuinely hard. Bones decay. Context disappears. So archaeologists have to look for patterns. Not single cases, but clusters. Not one unusual death, but dozens that can only be explained one way. At Ashkelon, in what is now Israel, archaeologists found a Roman-era sewer system beneath what had been a bathhouse. Inside it, the bones of nearly 100 infants, all newborns, all from the same site. No signs of disease, no signs of natural mass death. The most widely accepted interpretation? Unwanted infants, discarded. The bathhouse was a common location in the Roman world for women to give birth in secret, and apparently also a common location for what happened after. But when you find 97 newborn skeletons in a drain, you're not looking at a coincidence. Similar patterns have been found in England, in France, in North Africa. In ancient China, archaeologists have found infant pits, mass graves of newborns, almost exclusively female. One pit in Shaanxi province contained the remains of over 50 infant girls, all under 1 month old. In each of these cases, the archaeological record is telling the same story. These babies were not accidents. They were decisions. The Roman world where it was legal, documented, and completely normal. In Roman society, a newborn was not legally a person the moment it was born, full stop. It became a person when the pater familias, the male head of the household, performed a ritual called toiere liberum, literally, to raise up the child. The father would lift the baby from the ground where the midwife had placed it. If he lifted it, the child was in. It had a name. It had legal status. It was a Roman citizen. If he didn't lift it, the child had no legal status, and it was left on a public rubbish heap or at a designated spot outside the city walls. This wasn't a loophole. This was the law, written, codified, enforced. And here's the thing about Roman infant exposure that most people have never heard. It wasn't always death. Sometimes it was outsourcing. There were specific spots in Roman cities, a column at the edge of the forum, a particular gate where people knew to look if they wanted to find an exposed infant. You could walk to that column in the morning and there would be a baby, sometimes several. You took one, you raised it, and under Roman law, you owned it. Not hidden, not shameful. Just a part of how Roman cities worked. A shaman deciding which child the spirits would accept, and a Roman father deciding which child the family could afford, had almost nothing in common. Except they were making the same call. But wait, what about the ugly part? What actually made a baby unwanted? In the ancient world, physical appearance at birth wasn't really about aesthetics. It was about omens. A baby born with a visible deformity wasn't considered unfortunate. It was considered a sign of divine anger, of bad luck that would spread to the family, of an imbalance in the cosmos that needed to be addressed immediately. In Sparta, newborns were brought before a committee of elders called the Gerousia. If the elders found the baby weak, sickly, or ill-formed, it was taken to the apatheti, literally, the deposits, at the foot of Mount Taygetus, and left there. Not a parental decision, a state decision. But here's the thing, was this about ugliness, or was it about function? Because in Sparta, a child who couldn't fight, couldn't carry a spear, that child was, in the cold logic of Sparta, a liability, a mouth to feed that would never protect the city. And that logic wasn't unique to Sparta. In ancient China, a baby girl born into poverty was a liability by definition. She couldn't carry on the family name. She required a dowry when she married. The Inuit of the Arctic practiced selective infanticide in harsh winters. And it was almost always girls, not because girls were loved less, but because in a culture where only men hunted, girls represented a longer period of dependency. Ugly in the ancient world almost always meant won't survive, or will cost more than we have. They were a proxy for function, for utility, for the cold calculation of whether this life was going to help the group or hurt it. The angle nobody talks about the ones who were kept. Because if ancient humans were willing to leave some babies to die, they were also fiercely committed to keeping the ones they chose. We find infant burials across the ancient world adorned with shell beads, red ochre pigment, carved figurines, animal bones sacrificed for the burial. The Neanderthal child burial at Shanidar Cave in Iraq included evidence of flowers placed on the body 70,000 years ago. The same species that was making ruthless decisions about which newborns to keep was also grieving the ones they lost, with a care that looks across 70,000 years, remarkably like ours. They'd simply made a calculation before that attachment fully formed, and once that threshold was crossed, the grief came after, full, devastating, evidenced in the archaeological record. So, what did ancient humans do with ugly babies? The honest answer is, it depended on who you were, when you lived, and what your community could afford. Sometimes they were left on a hillside. Sometimes they were picked up by strangers. Sometimes they were accepted anyway, wrapped in whatever warmth was available, and loved with exactly the ferocity you'd expect from a species that decided it was going to survive. The same humans who left infants at the base of a mountain also buried their dead children with flowers. They weren't monsters. They were people running a calculation we've never had to run, in a world that didn't give them the luxury of keeping everyone. Next time you see a newborn in an incubator, in a hospital, surviving something that would have been unsurvivable in any other century, you're looking at the end of that calculation. The point where the math finally changed in the baby's favor. It took a very long time, but here we are.